Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What Ted Says, where it's always time to have a fatter wallet and a bigger net worth. And I'm going to teach you a personal finance hack today. This is a good one, which we talk about what kind of mortgage can you afford. People ask this all the time. Do not get talked in or stumped from the mortgage brokers or the bankers that throw these fancy terms and a whole bunch of numbers at you. Here is how you break this thing down. Now, anyone remember Mr. T? Of course I do. He said, I pity the fool. But here we're going to talk about pity. This is the term that you need to remember first here. It's P-I-T-I. What does that stand for, Ted? Well, it stands for principal. That's what you're going to pay down on your house. It's how you build equity. You have interest, which you're going to take some interest rate on this mortgage, so you're going to be paying interest for a good part, especially in the early years of your loan. You have taxes, which are the real estate taxes that you have on your property, and the last I stands for insurance, and this is really your homeowner's insurance. Now, most people don't realize this, but you're going to have a choice with the TI. You can either pay it yourself and keep it in the bank, and then eventually when that bill comes, you pay it. But what a lot of folks do is they do something called escrow. And that means that part of your payment, the TI, basically goes to your lender. They escrow that money, and then they, in fact, make your homeowner's insurance payment, and they also make your taxes payment. So you can decide to give them use of your money for the year, or you keep the money in your bank account. A lot of people never even get the option because the mortgage company or the bank tells you, hey, here's what your payment is, but you really need to ask, what is my PITI? Now, how much mortgage can you afford? This is a question people have been asking for years, many years. I've seen it more than 25 years in my career through many different interest rate environments. Well, there's really two kinds of ways that you can think about this. Number one is something called the primary obligation ratio. And this is a ratio that the bank looks at with your monthly income to figure out what you can really afford for the mortgage. And this can be somewhere between, I've seen it as low as 25%, to maybe as high as 32%. I've seen it a little bit higher, but usually in that ballpark of your monthly income. And we'll talk about what kind of monthly income makes sense, but that's one ratio that they look at that's purely your mortgage. But the other ratio that can be important to the mortgage company is something called a total obligation ratio. And this ratio in here, we're talking about what do you have for credit card debt, what do you have for auto loans, and those other types of debts that add to the total debt load, because most banks and mortgage lenders don't want to see that number to be more than 36 to 40%. My feeling is when you get above 40%, you're going to start to have a massive debt load, and if your income contracts for some reason, it can be really problematic. Now, you may be a conservative person, and you also may be an aggressive person. An aggressive person, when it comes to that primary obligation ratio, let's say we use the numbers of 25 to 28% because I think it's safer, it would be 25 to 28% of your pre-tax monthly income. So the banks look at those two ratios, primary obligation ratio, total obligation ratio, and then you need to look at your obligation ratio, which is either use a pre-tax amount or a post-tax amount when you look at getting your mortgage. So when you're trying to figure out what mortgage you can afford, do you actually have to talk to a banker or a mortgage broker or somebody like a loan officer? The answer is no. It is right under your nose to get this done in a simple program you have on your computer called Microsoft Excel. Do you need to be a genius in figuring out Excel? Absolutely, you do not. So basically, what you're going to need to do is click File, and then you're going to see a drop-down that says New Template. And click that new template. Now, when you click it, there are hundreds of templates that are going to come up on Microsoft Excel. And in the upper right-hand corner, I simply want you to type in loan and then type in the word amortization, amortization. And when you put that in there, then you're going to see the document come up that says loan amortization schedule. The good news is Microsoft Excel has already given you a document that all you have to do is plug in some simple boxes and you can get some simple answers. Let's show you how this works. So the first thing that we're going to do in here is look at somebody that takes a $250,000 mortgage. Now, interest rates will vary over time, but let's assume today somebody's able to lock in a 3.5% rate on a $250,000 mortgage. Let's assume in this case it's going to be a traditional mortgage, which would be a 30-year mortgage. And let's assume simply on here that you're going to be making 12 payments a year, 1 payment a month. So let's assume that the loan date is going to start on September 1st. Now there's going to be a box that says optional payments, which we will get to in just a second, but in the optional payments box, all I want you to do right now is click 0. Once you've entered this information, you're going to see the spreadsheet populate itself and it's going to tell you a number. And in this payment is going to be $1,122.61. Now remember, from what I talked to you about, that's just the P and the I. So you're going to have to figure out what your taxes are and your insurance is to add to that to figure out your total payment. And you'll also see the breakdown of what it is for interest and what it is for principal. So you'll see in the beginning that there's lots of interest and a little bit of principal, and then towards the end it becomes almost all principal and a little bit of interest. Now, once you look at that payment, one of the things you might be thinking to yourself is, well, what's the difference if I took a 30-year mortgage or I took a 15-year mortgage? So let's remember, there are really two variables that we're going to change here. We're not going to change the loan amount. It's still $250,000. We're not going to start the loan date. It starts on September 1st. So that's not going to change at all. What we're going to be changing here are two things. We're going to be changing the interest rate and we're going to be changing the number of years that you're paying. So what we've done in this case is we've now changed the 15-year interest rate to 2.5%, and we've now changed the number of years in the Excel spreadsheet to 15 years. Now, it substantially changed the payment in this sense. The payment is now $1,666 a month. It's not $1,122 a month. So now you know there's a difference of roughly $540 a month. So now you can ask yourself, can my budget stomach having that $540 a month difference? If it can, great. It's a great idea to be able to pay the mortgage down in 15 years. But if you're worried about your job, or you're not sure if you're going to move soon, or there may be other extenuating circumstances, then you might not want to take a 15-year. Now, the real trick in here is what happens if I want to take a 30-year mortgage and now turn it into a 15-year mortgage. How do I do that? So in order to be able to do that, what's kind of neat on here is we get to play with the tool with just one variable box, and that's the optional payment box. So let's say, for example, that I went back and I put in the 30-year numbers. 3.5% for the 30-year mortgage in this case, and now I'm putting in that I'm paying it for 30 years. But really, I want to be able to pay this thing off in 15 years. So the question is, how much money do I need to add in principal every month on top of my regular payment to get there? So the first number that I'm going to plug in is $400 a month. And I can play with this arbitrarily on here until I see what it looks like. Once I plug in that number, if I scroll down the Excel spreadsheet, it will tell me how many years it is until I make my very last payment. So in this case, it took the mortgage now to 2039, right? Which isn't exactly 2035, so I still need to have another 4 years. Now, you might imagine that since we ran the 15-year already, that number might be $500 a month. Let's see if the formula holds true. What's interesting is that when you put in the extra $500 a month, the formula doesn't actually hold true. It takes you to 2037, not until 2035, which tells you the power of that 15-year, and it also tells you the power of compounding interest. So the number is probably going to be slightly north of that. Sometimes you've heard that myth that if you make one extra mortgage payment a month, it will turn your mortgage from 30 years until 23 years. You can run that on this spreadsheet as well, simply by adding a manual number in the optional payment column. So I play with this spreadsheet so many times, but in fact, it's very useful if you're thinking about timing your retirement or timing your kids' education or whatever it may be in terms of when you pay off that mortgage. One final point on here when you decide what kind of mortgage you're going to afford. Sometimes you're going to hear this term points. And you may say, well, what are points? And points is simply you paying extra money to actually buy down the interest rate on your mortgage. Typically, one whole point is about 1% of your mortgage. So if your mortgage was $250,000, one full point would cost you $2,500. But it might bring your interest rate from 3.5% to 3.25%. And it would be up to you to say, well, am I going to stay in the home long enough that the points that I paid are worth the additional savings and money on a monthly basis? You'll have to look at that when you get a mortgage. But if you download this spreadsheet and you use it and you run the numbers yourself, it will help you much more clearly in your own house figure out what kind of mortgage you can afford. Thanks for watching another episode of What Ted Says, where it's always time to get a fatter wallet and a bigger net worth. As always, share this with your friends. Subscribe to What Ted Says. You'll get smarter, you'll get a fatter wallet, you'll get a bigger net worth.